Something is happening in Berea that the Cleveland Browns organization is not fully ready to say out loud. And I'm not talking about depth chart decisions or joint practice observations or whatever carefully worded non-answer the coaching staff handed reporters this week. I'm talking about something sitting underneath all of that, a conclusion that the evidence has already reached, even if the people in charge haven't publicly caught up to it yet. And the longer I sit with everything coming out of that building, the harder it becomes to pretend the answer isn't obvious. Let me start with Herm Edwards, because what he said recently stopped me mid-sentence. He wasn't performing. He wasn't doing the ESPN voice or trying to go viral. He was just talking the way someone talks when they've actually spent decades inside NFL locker rooms, when they've watched quarterbacks rise and collapse and rebuild and disappear. And the word he used to describe where Deshaun Watson stands right now was survival. Not competition, not redemption arc, survival. And I need you to really absorb what that means, because not long ago, 5-6 years, Deshaun Watson was the kind of quarterback that franchises dismantled themselves to acquire. He was the player Cleveland traded away 4 first-round picks and handed a fully guaranteed contract worth $250 million. And the word that a respected football mind is now reaching for when he describes Watson's situation is survival. That is a stunning distance to travel in a very short time. But here's what got me even more than that. Adam the Bull, who was in that conversation with Herm, framed the whole thing with a kind of brutal clarity that I haven't been able to shake. He laid out the logic plainly. Even if Watson plays this season and somehow exceeds every pessimistic expectation, even if he strings together decent games and the wins start showing up, it doesn't actually change anything. He's gone regardless. The financial structure of that contract makes it an impossibility for Cleveland to bring him back after this year. So what are you really doing? You're playing a quarterback with no future in your building, while the quarterback your future is already built around sits on the sideline, missing reps, missing growth, missing the chemistry and the internal belief that young quarterbacks can only build through actual playing time. That is not a football decision at that point. That's an organizational security blanket. And security blankets don't win you anything in this league. Now I want to talk about Todd Monken here, because his position is the most complicated piece of this entire puzzle, and I think he deserves more honest examination than he's been getting. This man has spent his career as a coordinator, building offenses, winning play-calling battles, shaping quarterbacks inside other people's programs, and now he finally gets his shot, his own team, his own decisions, his own locker room to lead, and he walks into it with a seat that's already warm before he's coached a single game that counts. That is a brutal set of conditions. When you are a first-year head coach and your job security feels uncertain from day one, the gravitational pull toward whatever gives you the best chance of winning this Sunday becomes almost overwhelming. It's human. It's understandable. If Watson gives you a slightly better shot in week 5, the instinct to protect yourself kicks in hard. Herm acknowledged that pressure honestly. He said Monken has real obligations to his roster, to ownership, to results in a league that extends patience to almost nobody. But then he said, the thing I keep coming back to, the one sentence that I think contains more football truth than anything else said about this situation, this offseason. He said you cannot fool the players. Full stop. You just cannot do it. These men are in that building every single morning before the public ever sees a single rep. They are watching every throw, every decision, every moment where a quarterback either processes and delivers or hesitates and falls apart. A coach can stand at a podium and say all the right things about competition and earning the job and letting the process play out. The players already have their verdict. They formed it weeks ago. And once that verdict is formed inside a locker room, no press conference in the world changes it. The room knows. It always knows. And what happens in that room, in those private verdicts the players carry into every week of the season, determines whether the head coach has real authority or whether he's managing on borrowed credibility. Which brings me to Myles Garrett, the best defensive player on this roster, the player who stayed through seasons that would have broken most people's loyalty, the player whose credibility inside that building is essentially unquestioned by anyone on either side of the ball. That player went on record and told the world that in his view, Shedeur Sanders is the guy. He said Shedeur was the last one off the field at the end of last season. Think about what it takes for a player of Garrett's standing to say that publicly. He doesn't speak carelessly. He's too smart, too aware of how his words land. When Myles Garrett speaks about the quarterback of the Cleveland Browns, he is not editorializing. He is delivering a message from inside the building through the most trusted voice that building has. And if the coaching staff goes in a direction that directly contradicts what Garrett has already put his name on, without some overwhelming football justification, the fracture that creates doesn't fade quietly. It grows, it spreads, and it poisons the environment a first-year head coach desperately needs intact. Let me get into the money now, because I think this part gets glossed over too quickly in most of these conversations. And it shouldn't. Deshaun Watson's cap number this season is is $44 million. $44 million. That number is locked in whether Watson plays 16 games or 0. Whether he stays healthy all year or gets hurt in the first quarter of week 1 and never throws another pass in Cleveland, the money is already gone. It's committed. And because of how the original deal was structured, the void years that were used to create cap flexibility at the time of signing, the dead money attached to Watson extends into future seasons Cleveland is already trying to build around. On the other side of that ledger is Shedeur Sanders and his rookie contract, sitting at roughly $4.6 million. I want you to sit with that comparison for a moment. $44 million of sunk cost attached to a quarterback with no future in that building on one side. $4.6 million of genuine developmental upside attached to the quarterback Cleveland has already told the world their future belongs to on the other. Jimmy Haslam is a businessman before he's a football man, and businessmen don't keep pouring resources into decisions that have already revealed their outcome. They find where the real future value lives and they commit to it. The math here is not subtle. It never was. But here's what I want to spend the most time on, because I think this is the part of the argument that's being rushed past in the broader conversation. Beyond the contracts, beyond the locker room dynamics, beyond everything Herm laid out, there is a legitimate, analytically grounded football case for Shedeur Sanders in 2026. And it's not built on optimism. It's built on actual evidence. Start with what last year actually looked like for him. The Browns' offensive line wasn't just struggling. It was one of the worst units in football. Shedeur faced pressure on something close to half his dropbacks as a rookie. Half. You are a first-year quarterback trying to learn NFL defensive disguise, which is genuinely a different intellectual exercise than anything college prepares you for. And on half of your snaps, you have defenders arriving before your second read even has time to register. That is not a development environment. That is a test of psychological survival. And the fact that Shedeur showed real moments of processing ability within that chaos, that he made footwork adjustments under pressure, that he kept working through his reads when the pocket had already disintegrated, that tells you something concrete about what he's built from underneath the surface level struggles. Now look at what Cleveland did this offseason in response to that. They spent real draft capital on the offensive line. They committed real free agent money to the trenches with deliberate focus. The honest projection isn't that this line suddenly becomes elite, but a genuine middle-of-the-pack improvement is a reasonable expectation, and people consistently undervalue what that upgrade actually means for a developing quarterback. Moving from a bottom-3 offensive line to a league-average one doesn't sound transformational, but that extra half-second before the pocket collapses, it changes what's possible at a fundamental level. Decisions that were genuinely impossible last year become manageable. Throws that ended in chaos suddenly become completions that build rhythm and momentum across a full season. The investment in pass catchers matters too. Cleveland went hard at that position. Jerry Jeudy is back, and what Jeudy said about Todd Monken's offense was striking in how direct it was. Jeudy has played inside multiple NFL systems. He knows what it feels like when a scheme constrains you versus when it unlocks what you're capable of. And he didn't reach for a diplomatic compliment. He said Monken's approach was night and day. Real words from someone with a real frame of reference for the comparison. And what Denzel Boston described from inside the building deserves far more attention than it received. He was talking about the complexity of what Monken is constructing at the play design level. Identical formation, same motion, completely different concept underneath. Think about what that means for a defense that spent the whole week building its game plan around tendencies. Your safeties have been drilled to rotate a specific direction when they read a certain motion. Your corners have been told to pattern match off particular formations. Your preparation is built around identifying triggers and reacting. And then Monken sends the same motion, the same formation, and an entirely different concept underneath it. The defense has already committed to the wrong read. By the time it processes what's actually happening, the matchup has already broken open somewhere on the field. That's not scheming to create easy throws. That's engineering structural advantages that compound over 4 quarters. This matters enormously for Shedeur specifically because of where he's coming from philosophically. Under the previous offensive approach in Cleveland, the philosophy was conservative at its foundation. Short routes, quick decisions, get the ball out fast, and manage risk by limiting exposure. That can function in certain contexts, but it doesn't develop a quarterback. It doesn't stretch what he's capable of. It installs a ceiling on the entire offense. Monken's philosophy is the opposite. He wants his quarterback reading the defense at the line and having genuine authority to change the play. He wants aggressive downfield decisions when the matchup appears. He wants the ball moving vertically when the window also is there. And that kind of trust, the trust a head coach places in his quarterback's real-time judgment, his ability to diagnose a coverage and attack it, is how an offense becomes something a defense genuinely fears. It's also how a young quarterback builds the kind of internal confidence that carries him through the difficult stretches of a long NFL season. Because there is a meaningful difference between a signal caller executing a script and one who is actually operating with real authority on every snap. I heard a probability estimate put Shedeur performing above average this season at around 40%, reached through honest reasoning, not wishful thinking. My reaction was that 40% feels conservative. Not because I've abandoned analytical thinking, but because when you actually stack all of it together, the offensive line improvement, the weapons investment, the schematic advantages Monken is deliberately engineering, and the development curve Shedeur was already on despite those genuinely brutal conditions last season, 50% or better feels like the more intellectually honest number. The second-year leap argument carries real historical weight. Young quarterbacks make that jump. It's not automatic, but it is a documented pattern across NFL history, and the conditions surrounding it matter enormously. Harold Fanning entering his sophomore year as a primary receiving target. Jordan Jenkins coming off injury and reportedly looking noticeably faster in camp. Jonathan Mingo and Antoine Jr. now carrying a full year of NFL experience into their development. None of these players have proven anything at the highest level yet, but the trajectory across this roster is pointing upward. An upward trajectory, combined with a stronger offensive line and a more sophisticated scheme, is precisely the environment where above-average quarterback play gets created. What Shedeur himself said about his learning process landed harder than almost anything else I've heard out of that building. He described those first days of rookie minicamp. Everything foreign, the playbook feeling like a language he didn't speak yet. And then what started shifting? Running the same concepts out of different formations, different motions. The underlying logic of the offense starting to click. Every day feeling more natural. The preparation rhythm developing into something real. He said he was finding his groove in how to study this game at this level. That is not a quarterback treading water. That is a quarterback building roots. The moment those concepts stop being information you consciously process and become instinct you act on, is the moment you see what a quarterback truly is. And everything coming out of that building, from players who are actually in it every day, suggests Monken's system is accelerating that transition faster than the outside world realizes. When you pull all of it together honestly, every thread is pointing the same direction. The financial reality points one way. The locker room dynamics that Herm laid out, the ones that can't be managed with talking points or smoothed over with a good press conference, point the same way. The offensive infrastructure Cleveland has been deliberately assembling around this quarterback position points that way. The philosophical shift from conservative risk management to scheme-based aggression points that way. The voices of the players who are actually in that building every morning, including the most credible voice on the entire roster, point that way. I understand the weight that's sitting on Todd Monken right now. He is a first-year head coach with a short runway and an ownership group that hasn't built a culture of patience through success. But the decision in front of him is not actually complicated when you strip the noise and the fear away from it. Play the quarterback your future belongs to. Trust the evidence your players are delivering every single day in practice. Respect the investment you've already made in building a scheme and a roster specifically designed to develop a young passer. And understand that the locker room authority a first-year head coach needs, the kind that carries a team through adversity and keeps men together when the games get hard and the losses start stacking. Lives or dies on whether he has the conviction to follow the evidence honestly, instead of reaching for what feels safer in the short term. For Browns fans, what makes this moment feel genuinely different from every other false dawn in recent memory is that the logic actually aligns for the first time in a long time. The scheme fits the quarterback. The weapons carry real upside. The offensive line is no longer an impossible obstacle that makes fair evaluation meaningless. The coaching staff has a philosophy that actually matches who they're working with. And the quarterback himself is showing exactly the growth markers you want from a young player absorbing a complex system under real pressure. None of that is a guarantee. Football doesn't do guarantees, but the conditions being assembled in Berea right now are the kind of conditions that real contender windows actually get built from. What happens next is going to tell us everything about whether this organization has genuinely changed or whether it's still reaching for the comfort of the familiar when the harder, better choice is sitting right there in front of them.